All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, striking up another live stream. This is number 3 on the night on a Wednesday night. Our apologies for being number 1 late, number 2 without our guest, Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts. Unfortunately, I'm not hearing any response from Steve, who is typically on time and ready to roll and ready to go, and one of our best guests and contributors. So we certainly value Steve's contribution. Hope everything's okay with Steve tonight, but not responding right now. Steve Hellwagon with Bucknuts, 247 Sports, senior Big Ten writer, joins us on a regular basis to break down Ohio State football. Of course, the Buckeyes have a huge one this week with TCU down at Jerry's World. And since we're not hearing from Steve, and hopefully he's going to join us. I just got a text from him right there. So in the meantime, I will take calls at 860-325-3687. That's 860-325-3687 with college football. Got more talk coming up later tonight, 9:30 Eastern time, with Steve Hellwick. Steve Hellwick, not to be confused with Hellwagon. Steve Hellwick from the Texas campus television station, also the Daily Texan, to talk up the Longhorns side of the big showdown at home on Saturday night against Texas, against USC. And then we've got the Trojan side with Inside USC's Scott Wolf at 10:30 Eastern time. I'll take some calls at 860-325-3687. And while we're waiting on Steve, your thoughts about college football, anything that you've got for us this week, we'll look through the schedule and see what may catch your eye. Recently released a video, so I served this one up. Alabama was voted number 1 in the AP poll. Big surprise, definitely. Okay, that is the 106th week in which Alabama has been voted number 1 in the AP poll, going all the way back to the inception of the poll in 1936. Ohio State had previously been tied with Alabama with 105 weeks at number 1, and now it's Alabama 106, Ohio State 105. Okay, that's an indication of how dominant the two programs have been. I don't know who's in third place and how close they are to 106 and 105, but I released a video just this morning, not declaring the all-time best programs or ranking the all-time programs, but kind of setting the stage for what I'm going to determine to be the criteria for ranking the best programs of all time. Wins, winning percentage, conference championships, national championships, and then I pointed out the flaws in any of those rankings, any of those statistics. Then you've got some numbers and statistics that deal more with prestige and less with winning and measuring the program's dominance on the field, but Heisman Trophy winners, All-Americans, NFL draft selections, and then the trying to weigh the quality of the NFL draft selection, because if you want to go that route, then you're not going to rank a 151st pick in the NFL draft as high as the number 1 pick. And then success as NFL players. Should that factor into it, or is it strictly a college decision, an evaluation based on college performance, the program's performance at the collegiate level? All right, so check out that video and then respond. Give me your criteria in ranking the all-time programs in college football. Wins, winning percentage, national championships, conference championships, All-Americans, Heisman Trophy winners, NFL draft picks, success in the NFL, College Football Hall of Famers. I threw that in as well. And certainly check out that video. This is a Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So we bring you the very best, what we consider to be the very best analysis of college football on a nightly basis with some of the best bloggers, writers, and broadcasters in the nation, with the likes of Steve Hellwagon, who we see is getting set up right now. And so we'll let you know that Ohio State is, of course, facing its biggest challenge to date with TCU on the road. Neutral site, in quotes, neutral site game against TCU as they take on the Horned Frogs. And we'll have some interesting discussion coming up with Steve after the Buckeyes blasted Rutgers last week, a 52-3. after the big scoring day against Oregon State, 77-31 in that one. And Dwayne Haskins and company barely let the football hit the ground against Rutgers, 30 of 33. That included Tate Martell's 10 for 10 performance, and he went wild on the ground as well with over 100 yards rushing. Steve, how you doing tonight? Can you hear me? All right, we had Steve there for a second. I think he's still getting set up, so we'll wait for Steve to jump on the line. Another big rushing day out of not necessarily in terms of numbers, but if you watch the game. Hey, Steve.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, I got you. How are you?
Okay, I'm doing good.
Excellent. Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts joining us to talk Ohio State football. And please join him right there for Ohio State football coverage that's as good as it gets. Steve, I got to think that there's not another person that's being talked about more around Columbus these days than Dwayne Haskins.
Yeah, he's been off to a great start already for the Buckeyes. I think 9 touchdowns in 2 games. And coming off a game last week against Rutgers, he was 20 of 23. And then his backup came in the game, Tate Martell, and was 10 of 10. So the combined, they completed 91% of their passes, I believe, for the game, which I think was some type of a record for Ohio State in a single game with a minimum number of attempts. So they seem to be humming along pretty good. The receivers are making plays for the guys. The offensive line's doing a great job with pass protection so far. And really, the offense, there's been nothing but great things to say. I mean, they've averaged 650 yards and 65 points the first 2 games against Oregon State and Rutgers. But, they probably have more resistance in the Tuesday walkthrough when they have the garbage cans out there simulating the 2 defensive end positions as opposed to what they saw. I know Rutgers in particular was banged up, and Blasson Austin, one of their top defensive backs, didn't play. So some of that was to be understood that the Buckeyes would make plays in those 2 games. 77 points against Oregon State and 52 more against Rutgers. Going to be considerably more difficult this week as they face TCU.
So as a side note, referencing what happens there at Ohio State football practice, Joe Burrow made the comment before the Miami game in week 1 when questioned about the Miami front 7 on defense in particular and the entirety of the unit. He said, well, I had to face the Ohio State defense in practice, so I'm not that concerned. And his LSU Tigers went out there and took care of business in week 1. Getting back to the Buckeyes, to look at the stat sheet is one thing. The most prolific quarterback in the history of Ohio State football statistically by most measurements is J.T. Barrett based on longevity and also just sheer production. The guy, for all the criticism, accounted for 45 touchdowns his very first season there in Columbus. And so it just took off from there. And so, but Dwayne Haskins, just to watch the ease at which he throws the football and slings it around the field with the velocity and just the throwing ability or throwing skill is just pretty remarkable.
Yeah, he's been uncanny. I mean, he got into the game last year against Michigan, did a pretty good job, obviously. Took over a game when they were trailing to the University of Michigan, came in and led them to a touchdown drive in that game, and they took the lead. And, I think everybody at that moment believed it was his job to lose, and they went through spring practice, and he and Joe Burrow were kind of matched up one-on-one. And after the spring, Joe Burrow decided he was going to take his degree and go to LSU as a graduate transfer. And at least through 2 games, that's worked out for him. And at least through 2 games, it's worked out well for Haskins at Ohio State. So I guess, both guys are winning out in the end and both showing what they're capable of doing. So I think it's pretty exciting stuff. You have 2 guys who trained together at Ohio State, and certainly Haskins, if there was a time where you'd want to come in to be a new starting quarterback, it's when you're surrounded by a couple of 1,000-yard rushers at the running back position with Weber and Dobbins. And then you have 3 senior receivers and 4 junior receivers, all of whom have made big plays in big games. 7 guys, they go deep at the 3 receiver positions. And that's also a great luxury. They've got a couple tight ends with Farrell and Barry, who've each caught touchdown passes in the first 2 games as well. So there is no shortage of great talent on that offense. The offensive line is a little bit revamped with 3 guys starting in new positions, but they've done a bang-up job so far, and we'll see how they're tested, as we say, when they go down and they play TCU this week.
It's arguably the most talented roster in college football, certainly right there with Ohio, Georgia, Clemson, Alabama. No question about that. We got Steve Hellwagon on the line. You can join him on Bucknuts. It's a 247 Sports platform for Ohio State football. Steve's the senior Big Ten writer right there, joins us on a regular basis. The Buckeyes have a big one against TCU on Saturday night. You bring up JK, you bring up Mike Weber. I think it'll be interesting, Mike, Steve, to see with Weber and Dobbins if they play it just strictly every other series or the hot hand, or try to look at particular matchups, maybe. Obviously, Dobbins being the more shifty of the two. But Weber's really fired out and played well here after getting off to a rough start because of the injury last year and then coming on strong late. And it's just one of the best 1-2 punches in the country.
Yeah, they've really developed into that. Kind of reminds you of some of the tandems that Georgia in particular has had. Alabama has had some great 1-2 punches at times here in recent years. And basically in the first game, they alternated each series, Dobbins, then Weber, then Dobbins. And as the game wore on, Weber just continued to find creases and make big plays. Like he had a 49-yard touchdown. He ended up, I want to say, with 186 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns, and also caught a touchdown pass on one of those simple end arounds where they just flip it to the end around man, and they consider that to be a forward pass for, as it turns out, a couple times already for the Buckeyes touchdowns. I think Paris Campbell had one as well. So I think it will be interesting to see. I think if they get into a situation where they have a prolonged drive, an 8, 10, 12-play drive, they may substitute in the middle of the drive just to put a fresh player in as they get into the red zone. But typically that's what they've been doing, is going every other series. And Weber caught fire the first game. He had 20 carries. Dobbins had 15. This past game, I believe Dobbins had 14 carries, and Weber only had 8. And again, it was 35-7, I guess, maybe at halftime, something along those lines, or 30. I'm losing. The touchdowns have come so quickly, I've lost track of them. I think it was 35-0, maybe at halftime this past week against Rutgers. So there really wasn't a need for those guys to get banged up in the second half. They've got 2 pretty good freshmen. Master Teague is one of them. Brian Snead is the other, and those guys have gone in and played quite a bit in the second half of the first 2 games. But my guess is the TCU game is going to go down to the wire, and it'll be all Dobbins and Weber for the most part, I would think, in that game.
Well, if Rutgers wants to take any solace from the effort in Columbus, it's that they finally got on the scoreboard for the first time in 3 games against the Buckeyes. It was 114-0 the 2 previous years, whatever that adds up to, 56-0, 58-0, I think were the 2 scores, and finally got on the board. So Rutgers will have their issues. They got their quarterback, Artur Sitkowski, banged up by the Buckeyes front on defense, which leads me to this, Steve. The Ohio State defense playing one of the most porous offenses in FBS play and Power 5 play, certainly in Oregon State the previous week. From what they produced or failed to produce in 2017, got roughed up a little bit, gave up some explosive plays, and it was a bit surprising to see, even though there was always that cushion. So you never know how to evaluate that when the team's up 30 or 40 and they're giving up 75 and 80-yard plays. But it was uncharacteristic to see the Buckeyes give up 31, and again, in the manner that they did, and they really tightened it up against Rutgers last week.
Definitely. I think there was a real premium put on cutting down the big play after the first game. Ohio State scored first against Oregon State, and Oregon State came right back with 2 new safeties in the game for Ohio State, threw over the top. The safeties did not make a very good play on that touchdown. And then they had an hour-long rain delay at halftime that kind of prolonged things. It was 42-14, I believe, at halftime. Oregon State did drive the length of the field for another touchdown, but at least they earned that one. It wasn't a big play. Then to start the second half, the teams traded, I think, 2 or 3 touchdowns in the first 4 or 5 minutes, with Oregon State ripping off runs of 78 and 80 yards. You had 3 new linebackers starting, as well as 2 new safeties in that game. And Oregon State blocked it perfectly. Some guys took some bad steps, got swallowed up by the blocking, overran plays, took bad angles, and their running back took it to the house twice, 78 yards and 80 yards. And I think that what happened is they got back to practice then the following Monday and really sat down. They lost leverage on a couple of the plays there and took bad angles, and they really worked with the young linebackers. You had Tuff Borland, who was a starter last year, was limited to just 10 plays in the opener against Oregon State because he was coming off the Achilles. Jordan Fuller, safety, didn't play at all against Oregon State. He was a starter and a potential all-Big Ten guy. He had a hamstring injury. They held him out against Oregon State. So having him back for Rutgers really helped. Having more plays with Borland in the middle really helped. Pete Werner's a guy at one linebacker spot who's doing pretty good. Baron Browning has played some in the middle in place of Tuff Borland. He's done pretty well. Malik Harrison is another young guy at outside linebacker. Again, as I've said time and again, kind of reminiscent of Darren Lee, Josh Perry a few years ago. Took them a few games to get their feet under them, but by the end of the year they were playing at a championship caliber level, and we'll see if the Buckeyes can get that out of these guys.
I don't know if you noticed, Steve, but Darren Lee had a huge night Monday Night Football.
2 picks, yeah.
2 picks in that game. I think he brought one back for a.
It's somebody made the comment that Ohio State really produces great defensive backs after that. Well, he's a linebacker, but they'll take it, no question about it.
Yeah, Denzel Ward also.
Denzel Ward 2 picks, yeah.
2 picks for the Cleveland Browns. First
career game.
Yes, with 2 interceptions in his debut there, and justifying, at least for the first game, his top 5 NFL draft selection. So back to the here and now. And speaking of those 2 guys, I'll take us back to 2014, Steve, because I had a few different beat writers for TCU on during the offseason, and they were quick to jump to this Ohio State game. Well, rightfully so. It's the big game, the big matchup for each school in the non-conference play. But, of course, the connection is 2014, the inaugural college football playoff, the big selection at the end of the year, Alabama, Oregon, Florida State seemingly in the door because FSU was undefeated. Alabama and Oregon, that's a different argument for me because I didn't know why they got a free pass with 1 loss. But anyway, it came down to Baylor, TCU, Ohio State. Of course, the Buckeyes got the nod off the strength of winning the 13th data point and doing that very impressively over Wisconsin 59-0 in the Big Ten championship game. And TCU, Steve, their fans still holding on to that. They've got a grudge. I had to remind the 2 gentlemen that I was speaking with, Ohio State didn't make that decision. They just showed up for the playoff. They didn't make that decision, but it's kind of an interesting storyline where these 2 teams, it would have been nice to see them play 4 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. They were both right there, 4, 5, 6. You could have put any of those 3 teams in a hat and pulled them out and made a case for any of the 3 of them. As it turned out, Ohio State's last game, the 59-0 win over Wisconsin, was what swung it for the Buckeyes that year. And, there may be people who follow TCU who are still upset about that. Gary Patterson, the coach, may still harbor a little bit of resentment about it. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody who's playing on the field really had their life impacted too much by that decision. If they did, they would have been a true freshman at Baylor that year, and now a 5th-year senior. I don't know how many of those there are. Ohio State doesn't have a whole lot of them. They have a few of them who were at least on the roster, but not contributors that first year in 2014. So, again, I think that's something for people outside the game to kind of argue back and forth, and kind of a neat thing. I'm sure they'll bring it up on College Game Day as kind of a neat sidebar to this game. But when we talk about TCU, Mark, the 2 things that stand out to me is Gary Patterson always has his team ready to play. And they typically give everybody they play a great game. Now, I know they lost to Oklahoma twice last year. Ohio State lost at home to Oklahoma. So that, in a nutshell, kind of negates that or cancels that out some would say. Last year, TCU went on the road and beat Oklahoma State when they were ranked number 6 in the country. They beat Stanford in their bowl game. They were a top 15 team. And Mark, my research shows that in the last 5 years, TCU has 9 wins over top 15 opponents. They are not going to be awed by Ohio State when they show up. They may be after a quarter or two after the Buckeyes get after them a little bit. But to start the game, it doesn't seem to me like they're going to be afraid of Ohio State, and they're going to embrace the challenge. Now, the one thing I will say kind of in flip to this is in the league that they play in, TCU does not play anybody, anywhere.
Unfortunately, Steve froze up, and he had the blank right there. TCU doesn't play anybody blank. Now, I'm going to try to fill it in there. I think Steve might be talking about as quite as physical, athletic, and fast, all combined, as the Ohio State roster. Hopefully, Steve's going to... Steve, are you still with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
What's funny is you froze up right when you mentioned that you don't think that TCU is plays on a regular basis, that they play anyone as and then blank the
defense. Anybody who's
there you go. All right,
strong defensively as Ohio State with the front four that the Buckeyes have, with in particular Bosa and Jones and Chase Young have just been outstanding so far this season. And so they're going to have to block up front. Of course, TCU can negate that a little bit, that aggressiveness with the running and the passing of Sean Robinson, the quarterback. The Buckeyes haven't faced a mobile quarterback yet. They've faced mostly guys who stayed in the pocket. So that'll be interesting to see if the Buckeyes can keep, as I'm hitting my computer, if they can hem Robinson in and keep him in the pocket, make him try and beat them throwing the ball. That will be the big thing. But if he wants to try and run and Bosa gets a hit on him, we saw last week with Artur Sikowski, he was not long for that game. So Bosa can be a very physical player. So can Draymond Jones, and be interesting to see. Ohio State's got 7 guys from the state of Texas, which is kind of an interesting thing, including guys in key positions like J.K. Dobbins, Kendall Sheffield, a cornerback, Baron Browning, the linebacker we referenced a little bit earlier. So they've got some guys that are from the state of Texas. Demetrius Knox, an offensive lineman as well. But I'll counter that by saying, and hopefully I won't freeze up before I make this point, TCU in their game notes says that from the moment that Patterson took over the program in 2001, there isn't a program in Texas that has a better winning percentage than TCU, better than Texas, better than Texas Tech, better than Houston, and better than Texas A&M. They've won more games since 2001 than any other Texas college program. And Texas has won the national championship in that stretch as well. So that is very impressive. As I said, they aren't going to lay down for anybody. If Ohio State thinks this is another Iowa situation where they can just throw their helmets out there on the field and expect to win the game, they're going to get their helmets handed back to them with a loss probably.
Yeah, it's very impressive. Even though TCU has a proud tradition, it pales in comparison to Texas, especially. Sammy Baugh hails from TCU, and Davey O'Brien as well. And so there's a rich heritage there at TCU, but nobody's going to mistake TCU in terms of history with the University of Texas in particular. Then you also add in the other schools that you just mentioned that have been playing whatever the term has been at the time, but basically Power 5 football for all this time. For TCU, if you go back to that 0-1 season, a guy by the name of LaDainian Tomlinson was the running back at that point. And of course, they dominated at the Group of 5 level. Again, we've had different names for it, and of course had that impressive Rose Bowl showing in particular against Wisconsin in defeating the Badgers in 2010. And then they had a bit of a transition. Didn't take long for Gary Patterson to adjust to Power 5 football. They did have a slight rough stretch, a year or two, where they weren't quite on their game, but they've adjusted well to the Big 12, tied for a conference championship in the aforementioned 2014 season, and made the Big 12 conference championship game this past year. All right, we got Steve Hellwagon on the line from Bucknuts, senior Big Ten writer at 247 Sports as well, talking Ohio State football, the big showdown in Dallas, where the Buckeyes have had much success. It's been a good stay for you and the Buckeyes recently.
Definitely, that's where they won the very first college football playoff national championship game there at AT&T Stadium. Very impressed with the facility that they have there. And, of course, the Buckeyes were back in the Metroplex. It was in December when they played in the Cotton Bowl against USC, the two conference champions that were left out of the playoff. Obviously, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten squared off, and the Buckeyes won that game 24-7. So they've had two relatively easy runs of it there at AT&T Stadium, and we'll see, if TCU can mount and give the Buckeyes their best challenge yet there. My feeling is the crowd will probably be split 50-50, if not maybe 60-40 in favor of TCU. I think Ohio State's going to travel very well for this game since there was such an advanced notice of it. I know Ohio State itself sold around 10,000 tickets, and they figure the crowd will be somewhere around 70,000 people. So TCU obviously only 25 miles away in Fort Worth, and they have every opportunity to fill the stands. But we'll see. I'm sure the Buckeyes will represent properly on game night Saturday night.
All right, we got Steve Hellwagon on the line from Bucknuts, 247 Sports, a senior Big Ten writer covering Ohio State football in particular. And I got a chance to see TCU play SMU last Friday night, a game delayed 2 hours. TCU off to a bit of a sluggish start in the rain, only led by 2 points at halftime, then turned on the afterburners as you would expect. Sean Robinson, as Steve had outlined, a kid that's got tremendous dynamic playmaking ability. He's a bit rough as a passer, did not play much last year in relief of Kenny Hill. He got into one game against Iowa State when Hill was shaken up. TCU eventually lost that game. But other than that, didn't play meaningful minutes. This year, he's at 61% completion percentage, 4 touchdowns, and threw his first INT of his career in 77 attempts. What really stands out for TCU on the offensive side of the ball is just speed and quickness and space. Kavontae Turpin, for you Buckeye fans who have yet to see TCU play, don't know much about them. He's a premier punt kickoff returner, guy that they get out in space. He's caught 8 passes for 111 yards. Jalen Rieger on the outside, supposed to be one of the fastest players in college football. So from that standpoint, where Steve, the Buckeyes typically have a huge advantage, it's probably minimalized in this game against TCU.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is a case, again, we talk about Jordan Fuller, the guy who missed the opening game for the Buckeyes with the hamstring injury. He's got the experience at safety to negate some of these situations, and he's going to have to play some of his best football. If they can get Tuff Borland up to playing 30 or 40 plays now from the Achilles, that would be huge as well, just because of the experience factor. They've got some athletes. Baron Browning is a guy who could run plays down sideline to sideline, but he's really only played 2 games. And so, again, it's a learning curve, I think. And my guess is we're going to see TCU make some plays. I was impressed with the punt return that Kavontae had in that game against SMU. It was a very weird game as you go back and think about it. As you said, it was 9-0. It was a touchdown and a safety for SMU. And you had the delay. You had rain involved. TCU scored on the punt return. They had a defensive fumble that they recovered for a touchdown and an offensive fumble that they recovered for a touchdown before their offense ever truly produced points in the game. I suppose you consider the offensive fumble offensive points, but at any rate, a traditional touchdown by your offense didn't come until the second half. And it was a very slow start for TCU. If they get off to a slow start again, and Ohio State has short fields going in with Haskins throwing the ball and Weber and Dobbins picking up 5-6 yards a chunk, whatever it could be, it could be a very long night for TCU. So they need to get Robinson off early and often if they're going to have a chance to stay with Ohio State. I don't
We got Steve Hellwagon on the line from 247 Sports, so you can join him right there on the platform for Ohio State Bucknuts. He's the senior Big Ten writer talking TCU and Ohio State. I believe Steve's back on the line with us. He froze up for just a second, but just outlining TCU's inability to get off to a quick start against SMU, and obviously that would prove crucial against the Buckeyes.
Going to be incumbent that they don't go 3 and out in the first quarter on each of their possessions or whatever, because if they give Ohio State the ball at midfield with good field position after a punt, it could be a very long night if they keep doing that, if they can't sustain some drives. Ohio State special teams are typically pretty good, and their kicker is usually pretty good at pinning teams back. And so TCU is going to have to mount some drives and flip the field position on Ohio State early in the game, in my opinion.
All right, it's TCU, Ohio State, and certainly we look forward to the big non-conference matchups, and this has been one that the Buckeyes have played the last 2 years against the Big 12, splitting 2 against OU, and now they get TCU in Dallas as a quote-unquote neutral game, but they're just 25 miles, as Steve mentions, from TCU's campus there in Dallas-Fort Worth. All right, Steve, we appreciate it. You have a great trip to Dallas. Enjoy your stay there.
All right, Mark. Appreciate it. Enjoyed. Been down there, as you said, twice, and looking forward to the third time.
Very good. Good stuff from Steve Hellwagon. We always appreciate the time with him breaking down the Buckeyes. And Steve, will try to track him down as we get into Big Ten play, of course. And I will stay on the line for some college football talk from you. The number is 860-325-3687. Let me strike up the live chat here and see what you guys have been talking about. I think there's been a lot of back and forth on the Buckeyes and TCU have. We got Apex Orca 78. Now that's been changed a little bit. I believe that handle. Hey, Mark, Miami Hurricanes fanatics in Sarasota, Florida, watching since August 8th of 18. So maybe it's not. So welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So we appreciate you spending some of your college football time with us and checking us out. We appreciate that. Buckeye State Sports, faithful viewer, appreciate his comments. What do we have here? I did want to respond, Buckeye State Sports, and I have one other comment to make about your statement about college game day. Funny, because I was just talking about this with the actual audio person who runs College Game Day, does the audio board for the production there on site. I was just talking to him today, sat down and had some lunch with him today, and he brought it up before I did, just in terms of where they're setting up. So I'm going to send you my response there. If it ever fires, I don't know why it's not. It's weird. Anyway, think my computer's locking up, but that comment back to you, Buckeye State Sports, is going to come off at some point. It's just locked up. Anyway, 860-325-3687. We also have NCIS Fanatic 21. Got to be geared up for this one. Looking for the Buckeyes to win 45-24. 2880-28, of course, joining us as well. So give us your prediction. So down here in the comments section, whether it's on the live chat or if you're watching the video once it posts, the recorded fashion, leave us your score on Ohio State and TCU. I think there's probably half the people think that it's going to be extremely close and Ohio State's probably going to pull it out. Then you've got a faction of people that see the Buckeyes and TCU struggling through a first half, and then the Buckeyes taking off in the second half and winning close to a score that NCIS Fanatic has here at 45-24. I see a lot of those scores, not just out of Ohio State Buckeye fans, but general college football fans that think that there's athletes all over the field for both teams, but there's a decided advantage for Ohio State. I haven't looked at the line, but certainly I will make my prediction here in the next few days. That is the funniest thing, Buckeye State Sports. Man, I want to respond to you, and I got nothing here. Let me copy and paste this. I'm getting annoyed here. because I made. Oh, I know why it's not. Bam, there it goes. I passed the character limit. I wanted to fully explain the information that I got about College Game Day. That's why it wouldn't go. NCIS Fanatic 21 commenting about a Wisconsin game at 20-0. I don't remember that one. So I am standing by here at 860-325-3687. I can take one call before we go to Steve Helwick, who joins us for some Texas football talk. So I'm going to hang out for just a minute, but we are just 5 minutes away from Steve Helwick from the University of Texas campus television station, and also the Daily Texan, who's going to set us up with the Longhorns taking on USC. Of course, Texas lost in double overtime to USC at the Coliseum last year and lost this embarrassing game to Maryland. And I try to reserve calling games embarrassing. They're all scholarship athletes, especially at this level, Maryland and Texas. It's not like Texas lost to an FCS school, but considering what happened in Austin last year, that they went and lost to Maryland again, when you would have thought that there would have been a little added incentive for Texas. Of course, on the flip side, Maryland playing for a fallen teammate. So there were emotions running high, possibly on both sides, and that doesn't always work for you. Sometimes it works against you, and maybe it did for Texas. But I still expect decent things from Texas this year. Not the college football playoff, as some have predicted. I selected Texas to finish in a three-way tie for second place in the Big 12 with West Virginia and TCU, and then win the three-way tie, get to the Big 12 championship game, and pull off the upset. So they are going to have to improve markedly between now and the Big 12 championship game to play the Oklahoma team that we've seen the first 2 weeks of the season just maul FAU and then UCLA. All right, got William Lee on the line. It's good to see you guys. So I appreciate the support. We don't have too many on the line right here, and I'm going to have to shut it down. So the reason I do this, and I know it's probably frustrating for you guys that would just hang out for the night and follow the entire live stream if I just did a radio show type format and just stayed on the line all night. And maybe we'll do this in the future. It'll just be a call-in show, and I'll just stay on the line all night. We'll have one link. Once you lock into that link, you just hang with me all night, and then the guests will come and go, and we'll do it that way. Unfortunately, for those people that just want to hear Steve Helwag and myself discuss Ohio State football and just want to hear the Ohio State talk, then if I release the entire video as one on YouTube, then they've got to hunt around through Florida State and Nebraska and other teams to find Ohio State talk. So similarly here, this is, of course, an Ohio State football post. So I don't want to clutter this up with Texas and USC. And on the flip side, I don't want those USC and Texas fans to have to search through a video with 45 minutes of Ohio State talk out of the gate to find what they're looking for. So for those of you that hang out all night with me, I appreciate it. I know it's frustrating that you've got to jump off the live stream and then try to find the next one, but it's always posted to the front of my channel. So that's where you can find it first and foremost. And I can't say that I can relate because I'm not sitting where you are and having to grab these notifications. So I don't know what it looks like on your end, but I would think if you just hang out on the channel page, the front page of the channel, then it gets live streamed right there, and it's about 5 seconds behind where we are right here. All right, guys. Texas Talk with Steve Helwick from Hustle Belt, the Daily Texan, and the University of Texas TV station on campus coming up in just a few minutes. The link is coming to you. Texas USC Talk for the next hour plus, because right after Steve joins us, then we'll have USC Talk with Scott Wolf from Inside USC to get the Trojan perspective of another huge matchup coming up this weekend with USC and Texas. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please leave your email at MarkRogersTV@gmail.com, MarkRogersTV@gmail.com for the weekly newsletter, The Voice of College Football, so I can get that out to you each and every Monday. We've had a great response just for 2 weeks in. We've got over 60 folks on the mailing list for the newsletter. So I would love that to explode into the hundreds and thousands, of course. So it's the weekly newsletter. Just leave your email address at MarkRogersTV@gmail.com, and you'll get that each and every Monday. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And sometimes it's mentioned here on the chat that maybe I've got 200 views on a video and only have 15 likes. So please help me out with a like and the comments. So for this video in particular, we're talking about one of the marquee matchups of the weekend, Ohio State and TCU. Would love to get your prediction, so leave it down in the comments section as well. And if you haven't subscribed, and I'm thinking that most of you watching right now are a subscriber to Mark Rogers TV, but if you haven't subscribed or you want to help us get the word out, please do subscribe to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We'll see you in about 3 to 5 minutes. Steve Helwick, Texas USC talk right here at Mark Rogers TV.